All right, well, we'll get started here. My name is Greg DeVore. I'm one of the co-founders of ScreenSteps. We're a knowledge ops platform, but really what we're going to talk about today is not software. We're going to talk about strategies for transferring knowledge to your employees. So this is what we typically hear. Managers and supervisors spend all day answering questions, especially from new hires. Does that resonate with anyone? They do their real work after hours or either early in the morning, because that's the only time when they're not getting bombarded with questions. And all of this leads to poor and inconsistent member service, overwhelmed new hires, burnt out supervisors, high employee turnover. We'll talk a little bit about that, especially younger generations. They're not staying with jobs as long, especially if they feel overwhelmed in that job. And we'll explain why that happens in credit unions. And then an inability to adapt to change. If any of you have gone through a core conversion or you're adopting a new LOS, even an HR platform, you know that can be very chaotic and creates a lot of variation in the organization. So why does this happen? The vast majority, no matter what they claim their strategy is, the vast majority of credit unions rely on shadowing to train someone. So I've heard of training programs that range from, we do 2 weeks of classroom training and then they go out and they have a buddy. I've seen ones where there's no classroom training, they just drop them on the floor and you sink or swim. And then I've seen other ones where they have 4 to 6 month training programs, but eventually they're going to get to this place where they're going to shadow an expert. Now, what problems does this create when you rely on shadowing for training? Has anybody seen challenges with this? What? You hope the shadow's good. You hope the shadow's good. Have you ever heard a shadow or one of these people, they come out of training and the trainee says, oh, they taught me to do it this way. And the person says, that's not how we do it. Yeah. This is how we do it, okay? So is this a recipe for consistency? What happens to the productivity of the person doing the teaching? It drops, right? Because they've got to help somebody out. So you're killing productivity and you're killing consistency in the organization. It's like that story I just told you. She shadowed someone who was doing stuff illegally the whole time, but that's all she knew. That's what she had been taught. So we say, okay, this isn't working. We need to have some procedures because we got to have people doing things the right way. So you go through this process. Everybody's got to document stuff. You write out these lengthy procedures in Word or PowerPoint, and you stick it on a SharePoint. So problem solved. Right now we've got procedures that people are going to follow. But if we're not going to look at, like, if I came into you and you might say, hey, we've got all our procedures documented, that's fantastic. That's great for the audit. But in terms of performance, it doesn't matter what's documented. It matters what the behavior is. So if we look at the behavior, they go to whatever it is, the SharePoint or whatever it is, they can't find it. And so what do? They're going to go back to the supervisor or coworker, or they're going to override the 0%, figure out how to do things on their own. But even if they find it, this is the thing. So there's lots of AI tools coming, like we're going to make it so you can find all your procedures. We'll just give us your SharePoint, we'll put AI on it, and they'll be able to find the procedures. In the tests that we do, even when they find it, they can't apply it. Why not? What do procedures typically look like? 10, 20-page PDF. I've got a member right here, or they're on the phone, or they're on the chat, and you want me to stop and say, wait a second, while I read this 20-page document, try to interpret what situation you're in and how to apply these rules to you. So even though we have procedures documented, we haven't made them actionable. And what happens is, once again, we go right back to the person who knows it. So we still have a bottleneck. We still have variability. This is the best case scenario, actually, if they go to the person who knows it. Other times they just wing it. And then, how many of you are confident that if I went to your credit union and I asked the same question to 4 different people, that I wouldn't get 5 different answers? And the whole credit union movement, how are you different from banks? It's member service, right? It does not matter how friendly someone is if they don't know what they're talking about. Like, I've had people that are super friendly, but I knew they did not know what they're talking about. And while I appreciate the friendliness, that does not help me, especially if we're talking about a financial transaction. I want someone who's going to engender confidence. Okay, so we get to this point that we're relying on tribal knowledge in the organization. Everything's different. It's very hard to get that, that consistent answer and that consistent procedure in place. And this means that onboarding someone takes a long time. Change takes a long time. Cross-training takes a really long time. So ideally, or this is what happens, we break down operational knowledge. So operational knowledge is the knowledge, the actual knowledge an employee needs to answer a question, to perform a task, and solve a problem. The challenge with it is it's very specific to your organization. I can't go into Credit Union A and take all their operational knowledge and drop it into Credit Union B and have it work. You have different people that you need to get approvals from. You have different tools. You have all these things that make it very specific. In an ideal world, though, you get an input, a question. You recognize the input. I know what they're asking about, and I can find the steps, or I can do it. But what happens is they don't recognize what the question is, and they don't know what the steps are, so now they're asking for help. This is what we want to create is, I recognize the input, I know what they're talking about, I can follow the steps, and we can get the right output every single time. So we just heard this from one of the credit unions we work with. Seeing a new loan officer close a loan entirely on their own was incredibly exciting. It's a game changer for branch managers, allowing their teams to work independently and reduce pressure on leadership. Can you imagine having a new loan officer originate a loan completely on their own without turning to the branch manager for help? That's what we're going to talk about achieving today, that type of consistency. Okay, so you might think we're going to talk about better training, right? Because if we have a performance problem, if we have people making mistakes, what does leadership always say? We need better training. And so you wave your magic training wand and you get better training and everything works out. But we know that that doesn't work in practice. And let's look at why it can't work in the credit union. This is a chart that shows the level of complexity and change in the organization. So if you're dealing with a low change, low complexity organization, training is a very good solution. I can teach you to do your job. You're going to do it over and over again, and it'll work. But if I'm dealing with high complexity or high change or both, by the time I learn the information, it's all changed underneath me. Do you ever have experiences that people will do different procedures or procedures differently depending upon when they were onboarded? So if they were onboarded under Mary, they do it one way. If they're onboarded under Tom, they do it a different way because the things that they learned have changed underneath them. Or it's changing so fast that they can't keep up with it. And so training, this strategy is like pouring a gallon of water into a 16-ounce cup. There's no way to make it work. Our human minds were not designed to absorb this amount of information in the time that we realistically need if we're going to have people be consistent. So there's a great book out here if you want to pick it up. The author's got an even better name, Thomas Wettelsberg. But great book called What's Your Problem? And the whole premise of this is the way we define a problem determines the solutions that we come up with. So if we reframe the problem, we come up with different solutions and often better solutions. So we have to reframe this from a training problem. If we keep trying to train, we're never going to get to a place where we want to be. We reframe this as a knowledge transfer problem. I'll give you an example. It used to be, I don't know if it still is, I don't think it is, but have everybody been to London, the black cabs of London, those cab cars there? To get a license to be a cabbie there would take on average at least 3 years because you had to memorize an entire map of London. And you had to pass this test that basically you could pick someone up anywhere and get them there without a map. Uber onboards a driver in 24 hours. 3 years and 24 hours, and they both get you to the right place when you're doing that. What Uber's done is it's using GPS, it's transferring knowledge that it needs right in the moment, where the other relied on training and memorization, and so you had a much longer onboarding time. Think of your training. Are you more the cabbie model, or are you trying to become more of the Uber model where people can know exactly what to do and get to where they need to be? That's knowledge transfer. This is a great kind of tool to kind of assess where your credit union is at. We call this the knowledge ops maturity model. And it measures how efficiently you're transferring operational knowledge in the organization. So down here at the tribal stage, everything is stuck in people's heads. So, if I need to learn how to do something, I kind of map out who the experts are in the organization, and I'll go to that person and ask them a question. I'll go to another person and ask them a question. Very hard to be consistent. Usually doesn't pass an audit. This is not a good place to be. So we move to the document stage. In the document stage, we're going to have the procedures, the SOPs. But when we look at the behaviors of people, not the content, we're looking at the behaviors. What do they do when they don't know what to do? They turn to a supervisor or coworker. And so at this document stage, you talk to the training team or the documentation team, and they're like, we're good. We got it all written down. But you talk to operations, they're like, we're chaos. Like nothing is consistent. And it's because the behaviors here at this stage are exactly the same as the tribal stage. You get all the same problems, even though you've invested all this time in creating these SOPs. At the guide stage, we're using a GPS. So we're not teaching people. We don't want them memorizing procedures. If you're flying anytime soon, the pilot is not using a checklist because he or she is an idiot. They're using a checklist because that is a sure way to make sure that they don't make mistakes. And so when we're using the GPS, we're using decision trees, we're using checklists, we're using recipes that help us perform consistently without relying on our memory. When we get there, we can change a lot of things. Cross-training, onboarding, change management, all changes dramatically when we move up here. So I'll give you an example. This was not a credit union, it was another industry, but they had a 12-month time to proficiency. Very complicated contact center. So it took 12 months before an employee would feel confident working independently. They adopted this framework I'm going to show you here in a second, and they now have that down to 8 weeks. So they shaved 10 months off of the time it took. And their new hires that went through that 8-week training had higher quality scores and were twice as productive as their tenured employees. Because this memory thing was the thing that was slowing them down and creating the barrier. Okay, so how do we move up the model? This is not about technology and it's not about content. It's not about having a better PowerPoint deck. It's not having a better Word file. This is about behaviors. We have to change behaviors and get that person to turn to a digital guide instead of a coworker when they need to perform a task. And the methodology we teach on this is called the find and follow methodology. So we're going to teach people to find information and follow it instead of trying to memorize it, because that's what creates all the problems that we see. The find and follow methodology focuses specifically on operational knowledge. And like I said before, this is a very unique type of knowledge. You have regulatory knowledge. That's the same for everybody in the industry. You can find it online, but regulations will not help you know what to do. So then you have policies and procedures that are in the credit union. But there's probably not a single employee that you hire that can come in and read your policies and procedures and then know how to answer that member question or how to follow that process. There's somebody who has more experience than them that translates that policy or procedure into what do you actually say? Where do you actually click? What decisions do you actually make? And they're the ones that are disseminating that information. What we're talking about is we need to capture that, and then we need to transfer that to them in a very efficient way. The very first thing we do is we separate out what's called actionable and foundational knowledge. One of the biggest challenges in SOPs, have you ever read an SOP? Well, let me start with this. Has anybody looked at a recipe online and had to scroll through like, this is why my grandma made this and this is the history of it and all that sort of stuff? Jump. Exactly, and what do you want? You want the recipe. Okay, now, your SOP, is it the same thing? You go through the SOP, this is why we do this. This is who created this. One time this happened and that's why we changed this. And this is what this means over here, and you're so bogged down in what we call the foundational knowledge on the topic that you can't even see the recipe that you need to follow. So if we want people to be able to find and follow things, we have to make it super condensed for them. We want a checklist, we want a decision tree with just what they need to do. No sentences. Say this, click here, do this, do that. Because in the moment that they're talking with a member, that's all their brain can consume because they're focused on the member as well. We separate out the foundational knowledge because they still need it. Now, years ago when we were first doing this, we thought if we just build the perfect guide, we won't have to train people at all. And it was going to be brilliant. It was going to make things so much simpler, and it totally failed. Because if they don't have the right background information, then the recipe doesn't make any sense. It's like I get a recipe and I don't know what a saucepan is. then that doesn't help me. I need to know what a saucepan is to understand what the recipe is. So when we separate these out, all of a sudden we can really improve our training. What we do is we take the actionable knowledge, and that is the only thing we teach. This is going to sound crazy. You don't teach process at all. You take this foundational knowledge and you say, okay, this is why we do this. This is what this is when you do it. This is who does it. And these will be into like short foundational courses on the topic, 10 to 15 minutes long. This gives them the proper background. And because there's not so much actionable step-by-step stuff stored in there, their brain isn't taxed with trying to memorize all the minutia of the procedures. So if we're doing Regulation E, we're going to give, okay, what is it? Why does it matter? What kind of processes will it impact? What do you need to know about it? But then, as soon as they're done with that, we've taught them, they've learned the foundational knowledge, 80% of their training time will be spent practicing, finding, and following digital guides. So literally, you don't teach them to do anything. You get up there and you say, okay, somebody needs to open an account. How would you do it? They've been through, like, they know what opening an account means. They know what the systems are that they're going to use. They know what kind of the big concepts are. They're going to search, they're going to bring up a recipe, and it's going to tell them exactly what to say and what to do and where to click. And then it's going to say, okay, is this for, is there a joint owner on this account? Yes, there is. Okay, this is what you'll need. And the first time they do it, it's a total train wreck. Like, they can't do it at all. And they're jumping all around, they're skipping steps, and you don't correct them at all. Why do you think you wouldn't correct them in this type of training? Any ideas? If you correct them, you are training them to go to a human for help. So if every time you make a mistake following a guide, I jump in and help you, I am teaching you that you need to turn to your coworker for help. So instead, what you do is you pause, you say, great try. Let's try it again. Pay a little more attention to the instructions this time. And the second time, it'll still be a bit of a train wreck, but it'll be a little bit better. The third time, they're going to start to get it. And they're going to start to see they can trust this thing. And then you're going to give them another task with another variation, and they're going to try it, and they're going to get it. And they're going to try another one, and they're going to get it. And what's happening is you are teaching them one skill that will help them do 1,000 things. We had one group, the contact centers, they used to triage their incoming calls based on complexity. So you had your more experienced employees would handle the more complex calls, and your less experienced would handle the softballs. Once they went through this, they found they no longer needed to do that because to the agent, a call was a call. They brought up a recipe and they followed it. And they didn't have to be an expert in whatever the system was, as long as the guides were matching what they needed there. So actionable is all very condensed, very just what do I need to say, what do I need to do? And when we do this, we learn the foundational, we practice using the actionable, we set up an employee that's going to be very consistent and very ready to adapt to change. Now usually at this part, the biggest concern is what? They're going to sound like a robot. I don't want robots working at my credit union. I want them to engage. We found that the engagement of these employees goes up dramatically. Why do you think that would be? They're more confident, and this thing can only handle so much processing at one time. So if I'm listening to the member and I'm also thinking, what do I do next? Last time I made a mistake. What was that mistake? If they're thinking that, they're not listening to the member. Where with this, they can be totally confident, they can listen to the member, they can interact with them, and they don't have that cognitive load of, I've got to remember what the next step is, because this is going to guide me through. Okay, so if we're going to get here to this El Dorado of where people are finding and following these actionable guides, we have to have a different standard for what we're providing for them. We call it, one group said, we really want to hold people accountable, but we feel really guilty. Like we're giving them garbage to work with, and then we try to hold them accountable. If we're going to hold them accountable, it has to be what we call findable, followable, scannable. Meaning they have to be able to find it in 5 seconds or less. They have to be able to follow it without needing the help of a supervisor. And they have to be able to scan it so if they're interacting with a member, They can follow the procedure correctly without having to pause the interaction to read a 10-page PDF. Now, that's a high standard. This is not, you might think, well, fine, we're just going to get a better search engine. When we work with credit unions, we find they are missing at least 50 to 75% of the content that their employees need, the actionable guides that they need. It's not that they can't find it. It doesn't exist. It only exists in people's heads. And that's because they haven't, when we write documentation or we create training, we create it around topics. With Find and Follow, what we do is we work with the end in mind. So we do what we call as a Find and Follow workshop. And that's where we're going to analyze what are all the inputs that you're going to receive in this job. It's not all the stuff you need to know, it's all the stuff you need to do. And if you want, you can email us after. We have a primer that has, Jay, what is it up to, 500? 750 different tasks that a member service rep or contact center rep may need to respond to, or inputs that they may need to respond to. So we take all of those inputs, and now we're going to map those to digital guides so that they're not going to search for something that says, okay, somebody wants to close their account, and I'm going to get this document that's all about accounts. It's going to be, how do you close an account? Or I want to remove the lien on this loan. Well, how do you do that? That's going to be the title of the document that they're looking for. So we're going to match the title of the documents or the guides to the actual inputs and questions they're receiving. Now, we need a good search engine, but we do this one step, and all of a sudden, search performance goes up dramatically because we've designed it. It's kind of funny. So, Google, most famous search engine in the world. Anybody heard of SEO? There's a whole industry about teaching people to design web pages so Google can find them. And yet we somehow believe that we're just going to write whatever we want, and somehow something's going to read our mind and people are going to find the information that they need. You need to practice what's really internal SEO of saying, what are people asking? Let's match the titles of those documents to the questions that they have. So they know instantly, this is what I need. Okay, now if you're going to adopt this, you need to kind of think of how you're going to piece all your technology together. So we call this a knowledge ops platform that's going to bring all your operational knowledge together. So you need a way, you can piece this together with other systems. So if you've got an LMS, then you can piece together the micro courses, which are key for that foundational knowledge. So you don't want to have hour-long courses. These are 15, 20 minutes on different topics. So in your training, you can follow, hey, we're going to do 15 minutes of this course. You go through that on your own. We'll practice activities around that. And then we'll go to another topic and do 15 minutes of this course and practice activities around that topic. The advantage of the micro course is you end up with a very modularized training. So if I have somebody come in who's already got credit union experience and they already know what Reg E is, I don't need to put them through that training. But if they're brand new off the street and they have no idea what we're talking about, we can give them that training and we can mix and match this. It's also really powerful when you do cross-training, because if I'm cross-training someone, all I need to do is give them the new foundational knowledge for the role I'm cross-training and open them up to the actionable guides. They already know how to follow those. We had a group that reduced their cross-training time from 30 days down to less than 1. And one employee, they didn't even cross-train. They just turned on the new guides for them. And they're able to go and handle those procedures on their own. The other thing is when you're building out your guides, you can't just use lengthy Word files anymore. It has to be scannable, so checklists are very important. Ideally, interactive checklists. This is a cool thing that you can expand or contract content under each checklist item. Why is that important? Your more experienced employees, if you have long procedures, what happens when your more experienced employees start using them? They stop using them because there's too much to weed through in there. And so you need to have a checklist that's going to match the level of detail that they want. It just has the high points so they can scan through it and keep on task. But that doesn't work for your new employee because they don't know enough to do that. So these interactive checklists, you can expand out as much detail as you want. So we can meet the needs of the experienced employee and the less experienced employee. The other part is decision trees. The vast majority, especially getting into loan operations, you're dealing with a lot of complex information. And the biggest thing that slows a mind down as it's reading through something is, if this, then do that, but if this, then do that, and if this, jump back up to step 3, and if this, go down to step 25. That's just way too much overload. And so instead say, okay, Do they have the required documents? Yes, no. I click yes, we move on. I click no, and it tells me exactly what I need to tell them to gather so that we can proceed. Did they show up on OFAC? Yes, no. Okay, no, it tells me I can just move on. Yes, okay, tells me what I need to do to say to my manager to get an approval there. So we want to set up these things that it's like, just like a GPS that's going to guide me through. Change notifications. You've got to have a system in place, ideally besides email, to notify people of changes. So what's the problem with change notifications in email? You never have an idea if they saw it or not. So you don't know if they are really aware of a change. And so you want to have that in there. You want to have things that are showing up in their workflow. Is it showing up in the apps that they're working in? Does it show up in Teams or Slack or whatever content you're using there? So we've got to interrupt those behaviors that are happening there. And then finally, you've got to have a way to capture this knowledge. So are you going to have a standard of how you're going to really train people? And it's not as easy as it sounds, unfortunately. We are not trained to write recipes. We are trained to write novels. So you'll see people sit down and write documentation, and it's paragraphs of words instead of bullet, bullet, bullet. And so you want tools that can bring those all together. This is an example of what some of this might look like. So if somebody types in send a statement, we don't want to go to an article on statements. We want something that says how to send a statement to a member. And so they know when they click on that, that it's going to give them exactly what they need. This is what decision trees for complex procedures might look like. Like you've got the interactive checklist up here at the top. You've got questions down below that will guide them through that. And so we can design an experience that really works for them. And then on the capture side of things, there's cool things you can do with AI now. So instead of having hands on keyboard, which is the biggest obstacle to getting anything documented, instead you can sit down and talk to them, and they say, okay, what do you do in this situation? And they just talk through that. And the AI will capture that and not just give you, a transcript of it, but it'll actually convert it into an actionable outline. So now with all their rambling and stuff, they can see a critical path, and 90% of the time they're going to go through, oh, I forgot something. Let me insert that there. But this is so much clearer than them talking through that. This is a really powerful way to get information out of SMEs' heads, your subject matter experts, without them having to learn to become documenters, because they generally don't have time for doing that. Okay, and this is an example of what like a foundational course look like. So if you're using Zelle, in your credit union, this is, okay, what is a P2P payment service? What we've heard from a lot of credit unions, they're having to hire differently. They're having to hire people with less experience. They don't have the same financial background. And so you have to do a lot more education. You can really standardize this by just doing, these are really simple to create because you're not trying to recreate all the procedural stuff that's in there. But you'll see down here, this is linking to all the activities they're going to do. How to request a payment in Zelle. So we're teaching them right from the beginning, we're not going to memorize this information. We're going to find and follow it when we need to use it. Okay, let's dive into AI a little bit here. If you do want, we'll have the slides from this thing. If you want to pick up any of this, we have a free course on the framework. I have free copies of the book. You can get in touch here. All of this will be available, and a recording of this session will be available at that link. Obviously, the recording's not there yet. We're still going to finish that up. But let me, at the end of this, talk a little bit about how this impacts AI. So operational knowledge. So AI is kind of like buying a Lamborghini, but they give you the Lamborghini, or maybe it's a Ram truck, because it's work we're doing. We're not a sport car. So it's a Ram truck, but there's not a gas station in sight. Okay? It's not going to work unless we've got fuel for it. We need a way to find out where the oil is, dig it up. We can't just use the raw crude oil. We've got to refine it into something that the Ram truck can consume so it'll run. So if you think about that in terms of AI, AI is coming to you and saying, hey, just give us all your stuff, and then if you use it, you're finding that it's not really giving you the results that you want. In fact, we have consultants coming to us. They're like, we have people who want to adopt AI, but they are not ready. They don't have the right data to feed it. So this is what typically happens. We'll get a little bit technical here, but not too bad. So first, they gather up all your documentation. It might be your SharePoint. They're like, just point it all here. You import it into this thing that's called a data lake. So a data lake is where we're going to have all your data that we're going to take, and we're going to use they're going to have a large language model, and they're going to use this thing called RAG. Now, RAG is, I always forget what it stands for. I keep going. But what it means is you're going to have like something like ChatGPT, that's trained on a bunch of things, and it knows a lot about credit unions, but it doesn't know anything that's not public facing about your credit union. So it doesn't know all your internal procedures. It doesn't know your internal policies. So you're not going to train ChatGPT on that. What it's going to do is use all these documents, and it's going to retrieve the ones it needs right in the moment to create the answer for the person. If they say, hey, I need to do this, or what do I do here? It's looking up what you've got, and then the best systems will tell you where it got it from. So what does that mean? If it doesn't have access to the right information, or if it's got the same procedure in 5 different departments that all do it differently, how is the AI supposed to know what to respond? We're asking it to do things that are impossible. So they get to the testing phase and like, this isn't working. And they go back to here, and the company will tell you, well, you need better documentation. And this is where you get stuck. So they start gathering documentation, and the problem is a lot of these organizations are looking at this as a project. But who has it just said? This stuff is changing all the time. So you can't treat this as a project. You might get it to a state that it's good on May 5th, but by January 1st or June 1st, it's out of date. So you need to have a system that you go into place of where we're repopulating this data lake with fresh knowledge there. So as you're doing this, this is where a knowledge operations system can really come in and be effective, because it's going to help us capture that information that's stuck in people's heads, transform it into a format that AI can consume, and give us a system for expiring that information and updating it as things change. And so when you buy an AI system and you don't have a strategy for how you're going to capture and update this operational knowledge, you're buying a trunk that's going to sit in your front yard and gather dust. And management is going to come back and say, why isn't this working? This isn't meeting the process. I thought we had the documentation in place. The fact is, in most organizations, it's still stuck in people's heads. And so you need a tool for getting that out of there. So a knowledge operations system is going to help you identify knowledge gaps, capture that knowledge from SMEs, refine and improve it, review and certify it regularly, and it's a cycle. This is not a project that ever gets done, but we are continually doing this, and as we do this, we're actually making people much more efficient and much more effective in the organizations as we do that. So happy to stay around and answer questions that people have. I'll tell you, we had one group that tell us, as they went through this process, as they adopted this methodology, they said it was the greatest human experiment they had ever been a part of. The culture in the organization totally changed. They said it was a hard place to work. People were afraid of making mistakes. There was this one employee, she'd been through the whole thing. She'd never handled this type of task on her own before. She always escalated it. She'd gone through the find and follow training. The call came in. She's about to escalate it. Her supervisor saw her and said, try it. So she brings it up. She follows the guides. She goes through the decision trees. She completes the call perfectly. She jumped up out of her chair, put her hand in the air and twirled around and said, I did it. And that's the moment that we're working for. Because when the employee feels that way, how does the customer feel? How does management feel? How does it feel to work? That's a place they said their attrition has almost disappeared. People say younger workers don't want to stay. Younger workers don't want to be overwhelmed, and they're willing to walk. Other, maybe previous generations were willing to stick it out a little bit more. When they feel overwhelmed, they're going to walk. And now they're not feeling overwhelmed. They feel empowered. This matches the way they learn. They weren't, they didn't grow up. They grew up Googling things and finding things on YouTube. And now you want them to sit next to Bob and ask and watch what he does all day. That's not how they were raised to learn. And so this methodology can change your culture, can just really transform the level of service you can offer in your organization. So I'll be around to answer any questions people have. And if you want a free copy of the book, it has a lot of case studies in here, has a whole plan if you want to build these programs of how you separate out this information and really make it easy for people to adopt. Any questions before we end up? All right, well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.